and welcome back to another episode of Salma grills Andreas about an article he put on the internet which made people very, very angry. Hi.
Hi.
In your article, many have accused you of rewriting history, in that the world you describe before Figma, where designers wrote HTML and CSS, is a literal fairy tale. Apparently this was never the case, and designers have always just worked to create static files in programs like Photoshop, and have always passed their creations on to developers to build for the web. Andreas, are you lying to us for marketing purposes?
Thank you for that question, for as an opener. I don't like the idea of this being a series, because I don't reckon this should happen often enough. But people were reacting quite strongly to this article, and especially interesting enough, designers, which at the core of it, and we're linking it, of course, in the description, so you can go and read it for yourself. But at the core of this, in my view, is a very pro-designer piece. Because I actually think the biggest issue we see is that designers are being put in a smaller and smaller box. It more and more just is, go and paint the interface, and where more and more design decisions, things that really should be primarily a design concern, is left to either product manager or in many cases developers. So from my point of view, this was meant to be hey, designers, it doesn't have to be like this. There is a better opportunity, but it got a lot of backlash. I am not lying or rewriting in history, but of course not every company in the world operated in exactly the same way 15, 20 years ago. But it was increasingly normal, or it was very, very normal at the time, that you had developers who worked in PHP or Ruby on Rails, and you had designers that worked in CSS. That was very standard. It was not the case everywhere. So as people pointed out, a lot of people had designers or like graphic designers that sort of turned user interface designers at the time, that worked in Photoshop, and a lot of time you got a Photoshop file and you had to deal with that. And Figma is definitely an improvement over that. There's no doubt about it. But it was also really normal that web designers wrote CSS. And that's not really the case anymore. Like, it's rarer and rarer to see designers who know HTML and CSS. And at the same time, I believe it's a bigger and bigger problem, because while CSS 20 years ago used to be quite limited, today it's way more capable. And it's way more capable than design tool like Figma are. So when you're as a designer working in Figma, you're only working with about 10% of the capabilities of a design language like CSS. And that will limit what you design. Like when you only have access to a tiny part of the available toolset, right?
I think we're also having an issue with job titles as well, because, I'm a developer. I come from a development career track. Interestingly enough, one of my job titles in 2015, 2016 was UX developer. It wasn't front-end developer. It was UX developer, but I was coding mainly. But the way that the company saw that job was that I was a designer, because UX was in my title. And obviously we had designers as well on the product teams, but their job was not to be in the code, but it was to make pictures that then they gave us. And I think we were still working in Photoshop at that time. It was actually in the early days of Figma that. But I was seen as a designer, a web designer. Another one of the kind of confusions in the industry is that design is bigger than just making pictures. Design is everything that goes into a web experience. It's how the buttons work. It's how accessible the website or web app is. It's how everything moves as well as looks. And I think that's where we're kind of getting lost as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think, and again, these are problems, I think, across the board, and to some degrees always have been, right? Like, what does design mean, right? What does it mean to be a designer? And I think that doesn't have a simple answer today, like, because it almost has as many answers as there are designers out there. Unfortunately, one thing it almost never means is going back to the sort of original meaning. And my co-founder Casper is a good example. He comes from industrial design, and he was quite shocked about how stark the difference is between that world and the web. And he said, because people used to respect him as a designer, which is a very like direct way of saying it. But in industrial design, as a designer, you're part of the whole process. It's not just one aspect of what is being created. You're a little bit in everything. That's not really the case in most cases of web design. We even start separating UX and UI designer as being different things, like how it looks should be different than how it functions. And that doesn't make any sense, because how it looks is part of how it functions. I think we're creating smaller and smaller boxes for people to fit into. And maybe if you work for Google or a company that size, it makes sense to have roles that are that specific, but it doesn't make sense for most of the companies and most of the designers out there. I kind of like that there's a push toward product designer, though even that's traditionally more of a hardware role, like title, but I kind of like that push, because I do think we need to stop looking at design as this tiny narrow slither of like making border radius and background colors, and start looking at it being like the core of how your product functions and the problems it solves and how it solves it, right?
I think there's also a misconception that because you're writing about Figma, because you're positioning Nordcraft kind of next to Figma, a lot of people assuming that Nordcraft just wants to be the next Figma, and it's another tool for mocking UI designs. Can you put the record straight on that?
It's not at all a design tool like Figma, and it was never meant to be. But it really came down to the fact that I thought this sort of split between developer and designer we have today, where they really don't speak the same language. And by that I mean Figma sounds almost like CSS, but it's not. And it doesn't translate directly to CSS. And you still have to do all the work twice. And then you have to go and do like the design work in Figma, and then someone else does it again in a different tool, like it usually code, right? And that handoff process, where you also have to translate between languages and from what is essentially a vector drawing tool, Figma, into an actual fluid, dynamic, content-driven design, like you lose so much information and so much is left out. So I want a tool where designers and developers could work in the same tool and everybody just focus on what their expertise is. That is what Nordcraft is. It's basically saying design should not be a separate process done at a separate time than developing the product. Those are two sides of the same process, and they should be done at the same time in the same tool.
But apparently, Andreas, you actually don't understand designers, because another angry person on the internet says not understanding what designers do and having a low-key, insulting tone of voice is a bold strategy for trying to sell to designers. Defend yourself, Andreas.
So I think I do, but obviously people can have different opinions. I don't think the article comes across as offensive or insulting, but obviously everyone can go and read it and make up their own mind. And please add YouTube comments. Since it's YouTube comments, that will always be angry, I presume. But you're more than welcome to, and I would love to hear your opinions. It's not the intention, at least, to be insulting. I actually think it's the other way around. I think it's insulting to take, especially people coming from like a history of design and design degree or long years of experience in design, and then increasingly putting them into a box and saying, no, it's not your job to figure out how things work. All of that aspect of design, all of that part of your skill set, we don't want that. We just want you to figure out what kind of colors it should have. That for me would feel insulting. And the designers that I know I talk with and has informed this article, those are the things they find insulting. And this article is very much trying to sort of bring that topic to the conversation. If you are happy with just designing UI in Figma, or if you are of the belief that you can design user experience in Figma, which I am absolutely not of the belief that that's possible, then maybe it will be insulting. Maybe you will find that to be me saying some things that you don't want to hear. That's not the intention.
There also has been a lot of discussion about how maybe we don't actually need a new tool. There are far too many tools out there, and we just need a culture shift in how design and engineering work together. What's your take on that?
I think that's true. First of all, like tools don't fix things. Like people with tools fix things, right? So I think we have a culture issue where what it means to be a designer has shifted and in a negative direction. And I think we need to get back to some degree, and the combination of moving back to getting those design values back, and then figure out how do we move forward in a new and create a new culture for that. I don't think a tool fixes that, but I do think tools can break it. And I think that's the problem we see now. We bring up Figma a lot because it's the biggest one in the market, but in no way is it Figma's fault. In no way is it that tool that did everything. But the idea that designers have Figma as their sole tool that they work in, and that somehow is good enough to communicate web design, is a problem. And that is a cultural problem, but it's a cultural problem that is now very related to a tool. And I come from a development background primarily, so I never quite realized the effect that modern frameworks had. Because for me, they seemed like a great innovation and a large step forward, and they have been in many ways. But they also ended up in many ways to be the last nail in the coffin for this idea of designers writing code. And especially designers writing CSS, because in the old days, all you need to know was how to write CSS in a text editor, and then uploaded it with FTP, and you could now like handle the CSS design part of the application. But those days are long gone. So as a designer, if you want to actually contribute to the CSS on a website or anywhere basically, you need to now install Node and get all your build systems set up. You need to understand how the frameworks work and find out what component hierarchy you need to tap into. Those worlds, the technologies have drifted apart to be a set of tools for developers and a set of tools, primarily one for designers. It's not the solution to bring in a new tool, but we do need new tools to be part of the solution. Like in order to solve this and change the culture, we also need a set of tools that can support that change.
And on the topic of tools, you also make the point in the article that the way we're working with these particular tools that are influencing our working processes and team culture are actually stifling creativity and making the web really boring. And some people on the internet are starting to understand at what you're getting at, though, because one commenter said, I do agree that our tools are making the internet less interesting. I remember in the old days when we used to build flash sites and we added these Easter eggs everywhere, and the web used to be so much more playful. Now everything is clean typography, rigid grids, sanitized aesthetics, and I think a huge chunk of this comes back to our tools. So are the tools we use really hindering our creativity, or is it the fact that we're all burned out by deadlines and pivoting to AI, and so all we can do is deliver the bare minimum to survive?
I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest. I definitely think it's a huge problem that we've gone from CSS being a bottleneck in web design, where we had to say things like, oh, I don't know about shadows. Those are really hard to do in CSS. That was the old times, right? Maybe, do we need shadows on something? That seems like a lot of work. But that's not the world we live in anymore. Like CSS is way more capable now, right? And Figma maybe handles like 10% of what CSS can do if we're being gracious. And I'm talking not just about actual things like styling features, but like the way you can do layout, the way you can do responsive design in CSS is just night and day different what's possible in CSS. Animations, bringing things to life, interaction design, all of these things are important parts of a designer's job that is not really possible to do properly in Figma. So I think in that case, like, yes, tools really are holding back creativity, because the platform we're building for can do so much more than the design tools we're using to design those websites. Now, process and business and requirements add into that, but it's not the full story, because it's also about friction. Like animations is a really interesting point because we released an animation editor for Nordcraft recently, and it's really interesting to see how many more animations we have in everything we build now. And they're not like superfluous irrelevant. They're good animations that add either emotion to what we're doing or actually guides the user towards what they need to do. And the reason why there's more of them is because we made it easier. We reduced the friction. And anytime there's friction, and especially if it's something that's not the core need, the core requirement, something like an animation where, technically the app works without. If you add friction for something like motion design, you're going to have less of it. And it's not going to be as good. Because the idea, like today, if you're doing CSS animations and keyframes in a traditional team, designers might have an idea, but the developer has to implement it. And especially something like timing and durations and all these things, the little things that makes an animation work well, those are things that require tiny, quick iterations. And if you're two people with a design handoff between you, that is almost impossible. The friction is just too big. So yeah, I think tools really do matter a lot here, especially even more so when we have a stressful deadline looming and we have a ton of things on our plate.
Another commenter says, the solution to some big industry problem that sticks is almost never a closed product that you buy from a vendor.
I think that's true. Like big, broad change aren't tied to a specific product. Or if they are, it's very temporary, right? And that's good. We don't want big things to be tied to a single company. Everywhere on the internet where some aspect is tied to a large single company, things just keep getting worse. We want multiple choices. We want multiple options always. But someone does have to lead the way. Like someone has to go and do it. And what we're proposing with Nordcraft is such a big project that it's not something where you can just put an idea out there and hope it happens. You do have to build a lot, and you have to make a lot of things become a reality before people start seeing what you mean, right? I've been working on this for over the last 5 years, right? It's only in the last 3 years people are beginning to get to see, okay, there's something here. This actually does make sense, right? For a long time, I was just a crazy person working on this in my spare time. We also very much agree that a closed product you buy from a vendor is not like the right choice. So we are taking Nordcraft open source. We've already done that for the core parts, everything you need for the runtime to run your applications, entirely open source software. You're not relying on us. You can self-host everything without any legal ties at all to our company or anything we do. We're also working on taking the editor and everything you need to build apps open source as well. There'll be Nordcraft, the company that builds a hosting platform, and hopefully we can make a hosting platform that's so good you never want to use anything else. But we'll also make sure that the core product is open source. So if you should want to, for some reason, you should have that choice. And I think that's a key part, especially if you're trying to make a big product that actually has an opportunity to change how we work. I think open source is absolutely key. I do want to also bring in, we say almost never, and almost is quite important here because there are examples. My favorite one is Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine, the first version came out in 1995. It really did completely change how people build video games. Before that, almost everything was coded. They occasionally had visual tools, but even sometimes when they had visual design tools, they had to translate those designs into code again. That was quite normal in really, really early days of video games, right? Everything was written in code. Unreal was the first one to really change that and say, no, we want visual, high-quality tools to build these types of software, right? And today, the idea of coding every part of a AAA game is nuts. It's simply not possible, right? We only have the kind of games that you can play today because there was a company that started this idea of creating high quality visual developer tools that allows you to have it. And I think the absolute same is going to be true for the web. We're going to see, if we get this kind of tooling, we'll be able to see a new generation of applications being built where we really can feel the difference.
So what do you think in the comments? Did Andreas defend himself? Should he be attacked further? Do you like the article? Do you hate the article? Are you a designer? Are you a developer? Let's have a chat in the comments about what you think and what you think the future of building for the web should look like. We'll see you on the next episode where I grill Andreas, because there will be a next episode, because we all need episodes of me grilling Andreas. Goodbye for now. Bye.